Hello, everyone. This is Sherif. Great to be here. I'll talk to you today about product management and some ideas and tips on how to break into product management, especially coming from an engineering background. So I'll describe a little bit my journey and what I did to get to where I'm at, if that at all interests you. So let me start with a brief introduction about myself. So I am a product manager with Amazon Alexa. I've been with Amazon for about 4.5 years now. Started with working in payments, and I spent about 4 years in payments, and then I recently switched to the Alexa AI team. Prior to that, and going backwards to the very beginnings, I was a software engineer, so I have a bachelor degree in computer science. I worked as a software engineer for quite some time, and then that was back in Egypt, my home country. And then I wanted to switch to the business side. And the way I did so is through studying. So I got my business degree from NYU Stern, and then got my first gig as a product manager at a startup called Detectica, uh, from which I switched to Amazon for the past few years. So uh, this is my LinkedIn link if you're interested in connecting, and I'll be happy to chat about anything that we're going to be discussing today. So let's dive into what is product management. And again, it's a very broad topic, and everybody defines it differently. So I'll keep it at a high level. However, I'll mention the top three things that uh, I consider the most important in product management, and what a product manager is really responsible for. So the first thing is being focused on the customer. So being customer obsessed, always working backwards from what your customer needs, having a very good understanding of your customer, what problems they're facing, and then naturally these problems will turn into opportunities that you can solve for. So understanding your customer, understanding their problems, which translates into an opportunity, that would be the first thing. The second thing is really what a product manager attempts to do at all times is removing ambiguity. And you would be presented with a problem, and no one would tell you what to do and how to do things. Why are you doing things? So you need to answer all of these questions. And there are good frameworks for doing so. And I'll touch upon some of them today. Um, so removing ambiguity for all of your stakeholders. It is for your business leadership on what are we building and why are we building it. It's for your engineering partners, the engineering team, the design team, the marketing team, on, again, what are we building and how we're building it and when we're building it. All of these questions you're going to be involved in, especially the what and why. Um, I'd say is solely on the product manager, and then the how and when you would partner with a lot of your uh, stakeholders to answer these questions, like the engineering team on how we build something, the marketing team on my apologies for the ringer. So the marketing team on how we're gonna take it to market, and so on. All of these questions you need to have defined and planned for in order to proceed to execution. So I would say that a product manager would set the plan, working backwards from a customer problem, and they would define what is the team building, why they're building it very clearly, how they're going to build it, and when are the milestones, and then they put this plan together and hand it off to execution. And in many cases, the product manager would also act as a project or a program manager. I've seen that happen in many in many situations. However, ideally, there is a program or a project manager that you would hand off the execution to, and then they would take it from there. They would deal with the delivery portion and reporting and everything, and then you can move on as a product manager to a new problem space, and then a new feature, like planning for a new feature or a new product or tackling a new problem. So the main responsibility again is removing ambiguity. Once there is little ambiguity, then you can hand off execution to other functions. Doesn't necessarily mean that this will always be the case. I've seen product managers doing a lot of things. Uh, anyway, so the last point, which is very important, is measurement and monitoring your success or failure. Because without monitoring, you don't really have any indication of how you're doing, how your product or feature is doing. So it is very important to define your success metrics and keep and defining the mechanisms of monitoring these success metrics, whether it's a technical implementation that will vend the metrics or a specific cadence where you're going to be pulling reports. All of these things have to be defined, and you have to keep an eye on your key metrics uh, at all times. So now that we have defined, at least at a very high level, what product management is, I'll walk you through some frameworks on how to get to define these 3 points that we have just discussed. So working backwards from the customer, which is very important. This framework over here, it is for defining a persona. So you would define who the customer is, describe the characteristics of this customer, define what they're trying to do. So list the problems or the tasks that the customer is trying to do and what are the outcomes of these tasks. And then what is the barrier of tackling these tasks? So what is preventing our customer from reaching his ideal state? Let's say there is a problem and you need to solve for that problem in order to reach what the customer is trying to do. And then describe how the customer is feeling about this problem and what is the status quo or what are the alternatives that the customer would resort to in absence of a solution. All right. So let me speak to why defining a persona is important. It will get you focused, to be honest. So when defining a new product or a new major feature, you don't want to be boiling the ocean. You need to be focused. And let's say you define your persona as uh, uh, let's say a working um, a working individual, mid 30s to maybe 30s to 40s in age and living in the city, right? If you define it this way, it will be a very different solution than defining a solution for um, people in their 60s or 70s living in suburbs. It will be a very different interaction with your solution. The expectations are different. So honing in on a customer segment and defining the solution based on your initial customer segment will set you up for success by being focused. And then at a later stage, you scale it to other customer segments. There's no shying away from doing so. Of course, that is also important. But at later stages, you start uh, scaling your solution to cater for other customer segments. So that is why you need to define a concrete customer segment that matches um, that will define the solution or shape the solution that you're gonna come up with. And in defining especially how like what the problem is, of course, is extremely important because this when you're defining a problem, you're gonna start putting possible ideas and solutions to tackle this problem. But also, there's one important thing here, which is how the customer is feeling about this problem. This will feed into your metrics, your success metrics, because you want to identify some metrics that answer to this customer feeling, or setting up your customer for success, or getting satisfaction or enthusiasm from your customers. So if you understand how the customers are feeling about a certain problem, you will start defining metrics that correspond to this, the customer's mental state or feeling. Right. So define your customer persona. This will feed into solution and metrics. And then moving on to defining a solution. There is one model that is very famous called the Kano model. And it basically breaks down or categorizes your features into three buckets: the basic features, or what is called threshold feature, like the minimum threshold you need to reach to offer your product, and then performance features, and then excitement features. And the reason why it is divided this way is because you would cater for or tend to different category of features at different stages of the life cycle of the product. So you need to start with the basic feature. You can't launch your product without the minimum feature set that any customer would presume is available. So a basic feature will be presumed by the customer. It is self-evident, like it is no-brainer that it is there. Um, there is an implicit expectation from the customer, and it is not explicitly requested. So nobody would request, for example, the one that is mentioned here, the volume control in a TV. Nobody's going to request that from somebody that is designing a new TV product, right? It is implicitly expected. And then these features would only be apparent if they're missing. So you would only see the problem and you would identify a feature as a basic feature only when it's missing and the customer is complaining that it's not there. So an example is the volume control in a TV. Now tying to the next category, what is a performance feature? It is something that is expected by the customer. They would ask for it. Um, if it is unsatisfactory, it will create this dissatisfaction. So sorry, that is obvious. No, I mean, if it is not at a high bar, the customer would be dissatisfied, but not necessarily the other way around. Like if it works, it might go again not unnoticed, but it wouldn't create excitement or enthusiasm about the product. The performance features would create satisfaction, but not necessarily to the next level of excitement or enthusiasm about your product. So an example here would be the screen resolution of a TV. The higher the resolution is, the better performance the TV is providing to the customer. Now moving on to the excitement features, and this is really what differentiates products from competitive products. So or from your competitors. These are features that would excite your customer and create enthusiasm and also um, customer loyalty. So they're features that would distinguish you from competition. Customers do not expect these, and an example would be design features, like a very well-designed TV would stand out. Offering incentives, prizes through loyalty programs. All of these are excitement features. I'll tell you, for example, a very smart move that I would consider that Starbucks did is offering their loyalty program. And it's not only a loyalty program, it is rather uh, a language that Starbucks defined for their customers. So you go into a Starbucks and you order. The sizes are different, right? Like grande, venti, all of these things. Um, in comparison to small, medium, large. Like, why are they doing so? It is because of creating customer loyalty and getting the customer back to to their stores, because the customer now has a sense of belonging to this place because they speak a unique language, and they know the language, like they're used to it. They're gonna go back to this same place and use that language, and there is a sense of belonging. That's one example. However, um, a lot of different examples. For example, Apple with their design approach, they are brilliant in offering products that are very well designed, and I'd say that design is a major component of why this product is successful. So if you see the features that an iPhone offers versus an Android phone, they can be very similar. However, some aspect of the design of an iPhone is really lucrative to their customer base. So again, this is an excitement feature that would attract customer and get adoption for your product. So these are the three basic categories, and you would tackle it at different stages. Of course, you're going to start with the basic features with a fast follow of performance features, and then you follow that with excitement category. So what would these get you in the end? So this is a chart showing the product function versus customer satisfaction, and it is presenting the three categories of features. So if you only focus on the basic features or the threshold ones, you're gonna get a lot of functionality into your product, but the customer satisfaction will be capped and it will plateau at a certain point. And then performance features will get customer satisfaction going regularly, increasing regularly, however, in a linear fashion. However, excitement features is what is going to differentiate your product. Of course, building on top of the other two categories, like you can't miss the first two and go straight to excitement features. Then you have a shell of a product. You don't really have the what a customer would expect. However, the excitement features on top of the other two would differentiate your product and grow your customer satisfaction exponentially. So that is the expectation from following this feature categorization, so that when you're designing a product, you have it well planned uh, and have the corresponding delivery stages. Right. Moving on to metrics. So as I mentioned, having your metrics defined and closely monitoring these metrics is essential to measure success or failure. And the metrics will inform a lot of your next actions. So if everything is going well, you will double down on features that are driving your success metrics. You are monitoring some metrics for, or maybe all metrics for the introduction of new features. So what is the delta when I introduce a specific feature, and how does it impact my key metrics? And then if things are going south, then you would think of, what can I do differently? Should I completely pivot? All of these things are taken into consideration, and they're only apparent when you are monitoring your metrics. You cannot go blind. Otherwise, you cannot react to what your customers are doing or not doing with your product. So here are some examples of key metrics, and there's no one metric, of course, but if I have to choose, I would say these are the key, or one metric for each company that they're probably um, monitoring. And they usually, even if this is a public company, they usually report on it in their financials. So for Airbnb, the number of nights booked, Uber Eats, number of meals delivered, Fortnite would be the daily active users, Netflix, the time spent watching, and so on. So here are some broad categories and some metrics that usually correspond to these categories. So in e-commerce, revenue and a number of orders are things that are usually being monitored. In software as a service and B2B space, retention and not the net promoter score. And then a lot of the social apps, of course, are tracking interactions. So whether it's the number of messages being sent over a specific communication channel, or the number of likes, number of comments on specific on posts, and so on. All of these things are being tracked to gauge how the product is doing and how some new features, new design aspects, and all of these things are doing when introduced to the customer. All right. So this was rather a long intro to what a product manager does and what product management is. So now I'm gonna switch to the topic that I really wanted to cover here, which is how to break into product management, how I did so. So I've observed this in many cases through my journey and other people's journeys around me. So I've seen it done in maybe 3 different ways. And of course, again, it may not be limited to these 3, but this is what I observed from my experience. So a lot of people do this change from or getting into product management or switching specifically from software engineering, because this is the title of this session and what I wanted to speak about. So they go through studying and seeking business degrees or specifically product management certificates. I've seen both happen. So people seek the business degree, and then this would enable them to switch. It would give them the credentials to switch from many different functions, honestly, to product managers. So especially the MBA, because many companies, and again, like my experiences in the US, so many companies in the US have MBA recruitment programs. So you would expect that uh, a lot of these companies are hiring MBA graduates. Um, I have my thoughts on the MBA program. There are lots of pros and cons indeed, and I can share many thoughts offline. However, the one thing that it truly gets you is a proper network to get to your next job. So regardless of the material being covered, what you learn or what can be obvious and you really don't need to learn, what the MBA provides is this network and the potential of getting to your next step in your career, what you're looking for. So, and this is precisely what happened to me. So I went into the MBA program, and through that program, I got my first job as a product manager at a startup. And the startup was actually founded by many of my professors. So I've worked with them closely during the MBA program, and then they wanted me to join their startup upon concluding the program. So that's how I got into product management. And then from there, of course, once you're in, you're gonna find a lot of opportunities. Even recruiters will be reaching out and so on. So studying is the first case. It is time consuming, and of course it is expensive. So that's one way. However, I've seen a lot of successful uh, conversions into product management through work experience. So while you're at your job, let's say you're a software engineer or you're a project manager, you can demonstrate that you're doing or you have the product management competencies while keeping your job, while you're at your job. So, and I'll speak about some of these competencies going forward. So if you're able to do so, and you can show leadership that I have done X, Y, and Z, and all of these are really product management functions. So then you have a case to make the switch, and many companies allow, especially in the tech industry, allow for this to happen. So my point is, it is completely doable to switch from, let's say, software engineering to product management while you're doing whatever you're doing, like while you're at your job. The third thing that I have seen is starting a business. So starting a business, because naturally it um, inhabits a lot of the competencies that a product manager should have, whether you're the CEO, the CTO, or like any, like honestly, any employee at a very early stage startup, like the first 10, 15 employees, you would be considered for a product management position, because it shows, especially if the business did well, it will show that you have the rigor and what it takes to become a product manager. And I've seen people do this. I've seen people leave their jobs, start a business, and then they would come back a year or two later as product managers. I've seen people that successfully exited and uh, have done very well with their startups, and then they want to continue their pursuing a career. So they would come back to big corporates as product managers. So of course, this is a very risky path to take. However, I thought of sharing it as also an option because I've seen it happen. So I'd say maybe the second option is the least risk. Uh, Least risk, however, from again my observation, um, I've seen it happen, but not that many often. So that not that many times. Followed by studying, which is the obvious one. It does take time, and you would have a disruption in your maybe a disruption in your income. You're going to invest a lot of time in studying. It is also an expensive way to do things. And then lastly, the starting a business is the highest risk, and but it honestly it would guarantee that you're showing these competencies, and it is a very good testimony to going into product management. So these are the three ways that I have witnessed. And now I wanted to speak specifically because, again, the title of this session is um, the a software engineer's journey to product management. I want to speak about the differences in that I have witnessed between being a software engineer, software development engineer, and a product manager. And the differences, they, they can be subtle. Uh, However, um, it's important to acknowledge them and know what you're getting into. So I'll speak in terms of leadership principles because this is what we follow at Amazon. A lot of the things that we define and a lot of our day-to-day even is uh, is driven by these leadership principles. So there are 14 leadership principles. You can Google them. They're public, or I think 14, yeah. And maybe there are a couple of more that recently got introduced. However, I would focus on the ones that an engineer would be um, would be really focused on versus what a product manager would be doing or focused on. So a software engineer would be delivering a lot, like a focus on delivery is crucial. So there is a leadership principle called deliver results, and um, delivering results and continuous delivery on the plan is something that an engineer is expected to always maintain at a very high bar. Delivering results, and then next one would be, in my opinion, again, inventing and simplifying things, because You're designing new things. You're inventing things in ways that should be scalable for the future, and inventing new uh, architectures for new products and features. All of these things I would expect from an engineer to hold at a very high bar. Now, when I come to product management, and through my career, this is what I've seen. Going from a software engineer to a product manager, and also advancing as a product manager. So getting high up in your career, you would see that there is a big tendency to shift to this leadership principle called "you are right" a lot. And the reason is, again, tying back to the very beginning of this presentation, is you are working at an ambiguous or with an ambiguous problem, and you're expected to bring clarity and structure to this ambiguous space. So in order to do so, you would honestly need a lot of data, and working with data to define what is the problem, like what is the magnitude of the problem, what are the different characteristics of these problem, and so on. But in absence of data, and because this is practically the world, right? Like you will not get perfect data. In many cases, you won't get data at all. Like the space is completely ambiguous. It's completely new. Nothing is there. You're maybe the uh, first person to tackle or trying to tackle this problem, and there are no well-established data sets or history of attempting to solve this problem. So in this case, in the absence of data or in the presence of imperfect data, you're expected to proceed. Like, yeah, the data is not there, so then what? You're going to stop? No. So you're expected to proceed, and you're expected to apply your judgment, and it should be good judgment. So this is where this leadership principle is coming from, and why it becomes important for a product manager, and why it becomes important as you also proceed as a product manager and get higher up in your career. You will be presented with bigger problems, more vague situations, and wherever you can get data, rely on the data, all right? But in absence of data, you have to apply good judgment based on your experience and knowledge and education. Like, use everything to apply good judgment on how to approach a problem. And if you have partial data or some imperfect data, you can always use whatever you have and uh, extrapolate or use some data as proxy for other data, right? Like if you cannot, for example, get data for X, but I can get data for Y, so I can use it as a proxy to signal what X can be. And I'll try to think of an example. Um, uh, Again, let's go back to TVs because I've mentioned that example in some slides here. So this is not really ambiguous. Like we have data on how how much is the engagement of customers with devices and so on. But let's hypothetically say that this data is not present, and you want to know how much is your customer interacting or watching your TV or using your device. In the absence of measuring uh, the customer engagement, or how much time the customer is spending watching, you can measure something else, which is how long is the device on, for example, and you can use that as a proxy, uh, which is because it's very related to the customer engagement. Or you would assume that if the device is on, then the customer is watching it, and you can take that assumption and proceed. Right? Again, it's imperfect data, but in the absence of perfect data or complete data, again, apply judgment, use proxies, and use your experience. If there's no data at all, use your experience, use your uh, education, your maybe some even high-level research to proceed and get this judgment to a good state, like as good as it gets. So this is the principle that I would say was very different from being a software engineer. Like the focus is different from being a software engineer versus a product manager. This one is critical to clarify the space and remove ambiguity. And then the second one is earning trust, because product management is it is tough to define even, right? Like, so many teams can be pushing back or not entirely convinced with the role of a product manager. Like some engineering teams might push back, right? Because they're in some companies it is completely engineering driven. So you need to demonstrate uh, the ability to drive the product, and you need to influence your stakeholders, your engineering team, design, marketing, finance, leadership team, of course, all of these teams. So earning their trust is a critical component to being successful as a product manager. And I would say the way of doing so is by meeting your promises. That's the first thing I would say. Uh, like if you say you're going to do X, do it at a timely manner as you promised, and also showing in-depth knowledge at the problem space that you're trying to solve. So these stakeholders will be looking forward to you as a product manager to get them the insights that they need, and each one of them would need something different, or like at least each category would need something different. Like the leadership team would need clarity on um, why and what we will build. The engineering team would need clarity on uh, what are we building with milestones. So you're not going to get into a deeper level of detail. Um, the marketing team would need, these are like very high level examples, uh, would need work with uh, ideation and brainstorming on how to drive things to market and how to budget campaigns as well, and so on. Um, Finance may need something completely different. They may need reporting cadence, understanding how much are we spending, stuff like that. So each would be looking for something different, and you need to provide them with in-depth knowledge of the problem space that you're at. So you need to have a good understanding of the problem space, and you need to understand the different aspects financially, technically, um, the business side of it, the go-to market, all of these things. If you have them nailed down and if you have them planned correctly, then you're gonna earn the trust of your peers and stakeholders. When you achieve that, everything else becomes, it's a one-time thing, I'd say, when you're starting in a new team or a new company. And then if you establish it early on, it eases everything going forward. So you wouldn't need to establish trust again with every product or every feature, of course, that you're introducing. If you are able to do so, then everybody would be looking forward to you to bring them insight into what is next. What are we going to be doing? Really, everybody's looking forward to you. What are we going to do? Right. So earning trust will help you uh, make this easy for the long term. Okay, so touched upon the leadership principles, how some of them differ from being a product manager versus an engineer. And I've mentioned already, like you're expected to work with a lot of data, uh, whether it's perfect or imperfect, still need to base your positions and defend your positions with data. Um, when I say positions, it means like your plan and your proposals and the hotly debated topics that you're presenting to your stakeholders. Like we have X and Y, and we need to choose between them. You need to back these positions with data, proxy data if the data is imperfect, or apply judgment where there is no data at all. All of these things are expected from you. And then lastly, as a product manager, writing and presentation skills. So in Amazon, we don't have presentations. It's all writing. So you write a lot of documents. If you're introducing a new plan or a new idea, you put together a document explaining how this product will be like when it's launched, as if it's a press release. And you would describe in this document what this product brings to the customer. The document is called a working backwards document. So by definition, it's working backwards from the customer need or problem. And you would answer a lot of questions that accompany your proposal. So you would try to anticipate what your audience would ask, and you would put these questions like FAQs, frequently asked questions, and then you're going to start answering them. And then you present all of your supporting evidence, data, the proposed design of what you want to do. All of these things can also go in this document. So we do a lot of document writing, and this is why I emphasize that writing is very important as a product manager. However, if let's say if your company is not following the same mechanism of presentations, it's not document based, it's presentation based, again, writing will help you. So being able to convey your message through in a written format is very helpful. And in many cases, it's better than verbal format. And it would get everybody closer to what you're trying to convey than if you're trying to do this by speaking about the problem. However, again, so writing is very important, and presentation skills are important. So if your company goes by uh, presenting PowerPoint slides or other form of visuals, then designing these visuals, designing the presentation, and delivering the presentation is a good skill to develop, and it will help you a lot as a product manager. So I'll be moving on to some tips for interviewing. And again, there's so many tips, and I think this session is trying to touch upon a lot of things. So I'm keeping it at a high level. But if you want to go deeper onto any of the topics that we covered today, I'm happy to connect over LinkedIn. Send me messages. I usually respond quickly. So for interviewing tips, I'll mention the top 3 that I can think of, which are demonstrating that you are working backwards from your customer. So in your interview, show customer obsession. And by the way, like this is, I understand that this term is might be associated with a specific company, it's Amazon and so on, but any company that you're interviewing for, if you show in the interview that you're thinking as a product manager about your customer, then you've went a long way to showcase that you're going to be doing well as a product manager. So demonstrate customer obsession. You're always thinking from your customer's point of view. You're bringing the customer perspective, customer anecdotes, customer data. Even when you're being asked, maybe I'll jump to the third point. If you're being asked to dive deeper into a problem, or how can you make this product better, and so on, ask questions that would show your adherence to the customer point of view, or like working backwards from the customer needs, right? So why would the customer use this? How are you expecting it uh, to be used? What is the customer feedback so far? How can so you can think of how you can make it better. These are some questions that you can ask. Like these are generic questions that you can ask for improving any product. So always speak and be the voice of your customer. I'd say this is the most important thing. And then followed by using examples. So in order to make things concrete, and again, demonstrate your abilities, uh, describe what you have done in the past, giving concrete examples, right? And there is a specific model called the STAR model. It's situation, action, result, that I would recommend that you'd follow. So you would start by describing the situation, like a real example. Pick a real example from your past experience and describe the situation. Then describe the action that you took, and please do not forget the result, because like I've seen this happen so many times. You just describe the situation and action and that's it. So make sure that you understand how these actions that you've taken resulted in making things better or worse. Like there's no shy again. There's no problem with failing at something, but you need to show that you understand the the consequences and outcome of what you're doing, right? So use examples to demonstrate the abilities and respond to what your interviewer is asking for. Try to use it as much as possible. And then lastly, this is the thing that we have also touched upon, which is ask clarifying questions, especially in interviews where you're asked to take something forward, make a product better, or even in your technical interviews. And when being presented by a technical question, you should ask some clarifying questions to show your interviewer your mental model and how you're thinking about approaching the problem. Lastly, I would like to offer some book recommendations, and these tie back to many of the things that we've spoken about today. So the first one is very a very famous book, and you may have already read that. So the Lean Startup is a book that would help you understand how to plan for a new product or major feature, or as mentioned in the title, of course, a startup, if that's the case. However, if you're not starting your own business, it's still a very useful uh, read towards planning the product life cycle and how to approach creation of a new product. And then the next one is working backwards. A lot of the things that we have spoken about today touched upon being obsessed with your customer, working backwards from your customers. So this book has tons of examples of how to do so, and real examples of like situations where product managers has been working backwards from the customer need. So it would um, get you to, like, reading this book got me to always have the customer in mind when designing any feature, to a higher bar than what I've already had before reading this book. Like it just the amount of knowledge and examples presented in the book are very useful to get your mental, again, framework tied to this idea of always being customer obsessed and working backwards from your customer need. The last one is the pyramid principle, which is uh, it's a book again about writing and maybe presentation. So how to present your write-ups, how to draft your content in a logical way, and how to make the flow clear and easy for your audience to understand. So this book, this is a very good book, by the way. Like it's amazing at getting you to convey your message through writing in very concise and easy ways. And I'd highly recommend all three. If you're looking to polish your writing skills, presentation skills, and I'll recommend the pyramid principle, of course. So this concludes my presentation today. Again, it's an honor to be speaking to you, and feel free to connect with me. I've shared the LinkedIn profile, I think, early in the presentation. So feel free to connect. Feel free to reach out if you need to discuss anything that we have touched upon today, or if you need any help with any topic around product management. Thank you so much, and wishing you a great day. Bye-bye.